Amen. Do you get that? There's no one like you, Jesus. There's no one. I mean, think about the significance of that one statement. Is there any world leader that ever comes close to who Jesus is? Is there any other God that comes close to who Jesus is? Think about this just for a moment. As we worship Him together, we worship Jesus because He's the one that came for us. He loved us first. It wasn't us that came up with Him. He loved us first. He came up with coming to us and making that sacrifice for us so we can have a relationship with Him. There's no one like Him. You may be seated. We worship Him for who He is. You can be seated. Thanks. We worship God because of all that He's done in our lives. And here's the reality. Ordinary people can have extraordinary effects on people around them simply by being an influencer. You catch that? It's in your bulletin at the bottom there in your program. Ordinary people can have extraordinary effects on people around them simply by being an influencer. An influencer uses what has been given them and shares it with others. An influencer can affect the direction of one person, one family, one community, a nation, and even the world. There's examples of influencers throughout our time, and in history you can see influencers throughout in the past as well. Being an influencer is a job you can have today, and I'm not trying to solicit a job kind of market thing. That's not where I'm heading with this. But being an influencer is actually what God calls us to be doing. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, Jesus says this in His very first sermon to His disciples and followers around Him. He says, "You are the light or the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet." And then He says in verse 14, He doesn't have the verses kind of put together here, but He says in the next statement, "You are the light of the world." This is why I say an influencer can affect one person, one family, one community, one nation, one world. We're the salt and the light, He says. He says, "You're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house." I mean, you've seen this. You go into anyone's living room. Have you ever seen anyone put the light underneath the side table? I mean, that's creative, right? Hey, we're decorating a little bit different. We take the lights, we put it underneath, behind, and no, you put it on top of, so that the light is useful. He says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Salt, it preserves. It flavors. It makes an influence on the food that you're about to eat. So I brought a salt shaker with me. Right? This little thing makes a big difference on dinner. Right? It's amazing. And certainly it preserves as well. And then you look at a light. If you turn the lights off in here, this tiny little thing can make a big difference. I take my dogs out for a walk at night. My one dog is like 14 years old and doesn't hardly see or hear or know that he exists anymore. He's kind of that old. And so I love the dog. It's all good. And so I walk him out in the yard, and as I'm walking around, I have to have a flashlight on. I don't care I just want to walk and enjoy the evening when it's dark. I don't really care. And he needs a flashlight and a leash so that he can have some kind of semblance of where am I going? Am I going over a cliff? This little light on my phone makes a big difference for that little dog. Jesus says, you, me, us, are the salt and the light. We are called then to influence others by being the salt and the light. Now, I say that, and there's a lot of cynicism in hearing that statement, probably. When I was younger, I kind of took that and I ran with it. Oh, yes, I am. But as I got older, you ever feel like you're talking to the wall? You know, like there's somebody that you're like, I want to be the salt and the light for, but you're talking to the wall. And there's nothing happening. Blank stares. No one's home. Knock, knock. Who's there? Nobody. They don't want to hear what you have to say. Listen, that's part of influence. And here's my question. Who's your wall? Who's the one in your life that it's like talking to the wall? And maybe it's not one. Maybe it's a group. Maybe it's a community. Or maybe it's the world. Because Jesus says this. He says, you're the salt, you're the light to who? Not to one, to the world. I hear all the time, and you've said it to me, we've had these conversations together, you've heard it from your neighbors and your friends and people all around, that in the world that we are currently living in, things have so drastically changed in the last 3 years. The unkindness of people. You drive anywhere and you'll find a reckless, crazy person that thinks that they can squeeze in and there's only 2 inches to spare between one bumper and the other, and they're going 75 miles an hour. Or 85. Right? And then they give you all kinds of expletives because you're irritated with them and you're just in their way. You know? That's one example of many. Where it seems like our world has become less kind, more upset, more fragile, more of everything that's opposite of where we used to be. And we're like, what happened here? And then when you say, I'm a follower of Jesus, Jesus has become what I'll say an odd thing in our culture. It's becoming more and more that way, where Jesus is becoming something that someone wants to push out, or the world wants to push out, because you're associated with this, that, or the other, that becomes a perceived negative thing. Many are now explaining Jesus as being irrelevant, old school, and frankly annoying. So if you say you're a follower of Jesus, you fit in that category where you're kind of old school or irrelevant, or you're just plain annoying because of your political views or your moral views, or just your views on life in general. So it feels like we're talking to a wall. So then the question is, have you ever asked this? Should I continue to talk to the wall? Is there any point to this? Or should I just walk away? I know that there are a lot of followers of Jesus that have been talking to the wall, and out of discouragement, cynicism, or criticism by others, they've said, I just am done. And I get it. And maybe that's where you are today. Maybe it's your child that's just pushed you over the edge, or your spouse that's just got you on your last night, or maybe it's just the world in general that's just got you there, and you just want to go hide somewhere, live under the radar, live as a turtle, as we talked about in the last couple of weeks, and say, I just want to hide because this is just too much, and anytime I try to influence anyone and say, here's the right thing, it feels like I'm just simply talking to the wall. Do you know that there are times when God calls us to talk to the wall? Do you know that? Let me show you one. Joshua chapter 6. A historically accurate, we'll call it story, because it's an account, a real account of something that actually did happen about 1,400 years before Jesus. Archaeologists did a whole lot of work in this site, and they've uncovered some things that actually authenticate this story as it is written here. Some of it they would kind of go back and forth on, but you'd find that in archaeology and history and people looking at all the different elements of what I'm about to share with you, identify that this actually happened. In some way, shape, or form, and there's some disagreement on that, I'm going to say that God already knows and has recorded it for us as to how this happened and the exact precision of the way things worked out. And so I'm just going to follow what God has for us here. Because for me, the encouragement behind Joshua chapter 6 is that as an influencer, as the salt and the light that looks at talking to the wall, sometimes the wall gets really boring to look at and talk to. Because sometimes I feel like the wall is never going to move. It's never going to change. And sometimes I feel like I should just walk away from the wall because the wall just is, it's just, do I really want to spend my life here? And Joshua chapter 6 verse 1 says, now Jericho. Now you know where I'm heading, right? Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. They were terrified of the people of Israel. The background, Joshua is called into leading Israel, and God calls him, a couple weeks ago we went through this, God calls him to be strong and courageous. And so he's leading with strength and courage, and the others around him say, yes, we're going to follow, let's do this. Joshua, follow God. And so the first thing they do is they go past the river, and then they get into this area, enemy territory, into the first city that is called Jericho. Jericho's terrified because of what they've seen God do in Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, verse 2, see, look at this, I have given Jericho into your hand. It's already done. This city that you're about to go into and conquer, I've already given them into your hand. They shut the wall, they shut the doors, no one's coming out and going in because they're terrified of you. See, listen, it's already a done deal. Isn't it great when God puts a period on something that you still have a question mark on? Isn't it God when does that? He does that ahead of time and says, hey, listen, I got this. And you're like, well, okay, right? And that's what he does with Joshua. He says, and its king and the mighty men of valor. You shall, here's the orders, right? You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. Okay, so here's what you're doing. First day, day one. Get the mighty men of valor. Get the army, the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy. Get all of them together and the National Guard. And we're going to walk around the wall. So you're going to go for a couple miles of walk and go around this wall. The wall, by the way, is from archaeologists that have worked through this. They say that the wall was somewhere in the range of 13 feet to 30 feet, somewhere in that range. There's areas where it's probably 24 to 30 feet high, and there's areas where it's probably as low as 12 or 13 feet. So 12 feet, if you're here in person, those online are going to miss this, 12 feet is from the floor to the ceiling. That's 12 feet. So that's the height of the wall. And then it's about 6 feet or 10 feet like thick. So it'd be like half from here to here kind of thing. So it's like these pews going all the way down, brick concrete, whatever walls going all around the city. It's a good wall to help keep the intruders out. That's the point. So he says, you shall march around all of this for 6 days. Verse 4, 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. And 7 is a day that God kind of keeps, or is a number that God kind of keeps for us as a perfection sort of a number. And he uses 7 throughout the Bible in a lot of different ways. And then he says on the 7th day, so you have 7 priests with 7 trumpets, 7 ram's horns. And on the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times. So you march around it once, no big deal. You do it every day. By the 7th day, you're going around 7 times. Listen, if you're going for a walk and you walk for a couple miles, you feel like, hey, that was good. You do that for a few days, you feel good. 7th day, if you're going into battle and you have a lot expected of you, wouldn't you do it opposite? If you're coaching soccer or coaching football, you say, we're going to run hard, run hard, run hard. And when it comes to game day, we're going to take it easy a little bit, like right before, so that you're ready and rested. God does it opposite. Why? Because he wants them to totally rely on the strength of the Lord. He says, then you'll go around the 7th day, you'll march around it 7 times, and the priest shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. The people shall go up, everyone straight before him. So, I'm telling you, Joshua, you're going to go talk to the wall. Isn't that great? Here's your first battle. The first thing you're going to do, the greatest, thing that you're going to set as a marking point for how we're going to do things around here is we're going to go talk to a wall. Going to go for a nice little walk, and at the end of it, just be quiet. 7 days later, you're going to walk around, and by the time you're done, you're just going to stand at this wall that you've been walking around, and you're going to just talk at it loudly, shout at it. Now, you're rational people. You're all very smart. Could you imagine being one of the mighty men of valor? Could you imagine being one of the priests or being someone that's walking around and... Listen, day 1 would be interesting, right? We're not talking, we're just walking. At the end of it, you get back to camp and, hey man, did you see that one field? That's so cool. It looks like Longwood Gardens, the way that it has this, that, and the other thing. It was so neat there, right? Would that be the conversation? Might be a little different. Hey, this was kind of weird today. Yeah, it was. We got to do this tomorrow too. All right. Hey, Joshua, got a question. So that was kind of a fun walk and all. I mean, wouldn't you ask this like we're in a crowd, like we got this going on, and Joshua, have you ever had an experience seeing walls fall down like this? It's kind of weird, Joshua. Hey, Joshua, over here. Hey, are you sure you prayed about this? I mean, what about the battering ram? Can we that would be cool. You got some cool weapons they've been designing. We can throw some things over and Joshua, are you sure about this? And they start walking around, and I just wonder if they're like you and I. That after walking around the wall and viewing the wall from the perspective of here's day 7 coming, I wonder how many of them looked and said, good night, this thing's huge. This is strong. And maybe they got out of line, and they kind of were walking, and they get over to the wall, and they're like, let's see how strong it is. Looks like it's pretty strong. I don't know if this is really going to work. Could you imagine this? Wouldn't you kind of be there? I would think that maybe there were some that talked themselves out of it. I would think that there's some that the cynicism involved in looking at this, the rationality of this just doesn't happen. It takes courage. It takes courage to walk together around a wall. And it takes courage to even think that by talking to the wall, you can influence it. Have you been there? Where you look at this wall and you say, there's no way. I've walked around this wall a few times. I didn't say anything because I didn't even know what to say. And I didn't feel God was leading me to say anything. And God, you really want me to... I'm walking around this wall and they don't want me to say anything. And they don't like me. And they want me to get out of their life and get away from them. And as a follower of Jesus, I look at where they're at. And I want them to have hope and security in Jesus Christ. Because that's who my hope and security really is all about. You walk around and you rationally start to think, maybe nothing's going to change. I love this because verse 6 is cool. Verse 6 is probably one of many of the verses that I love about Joshua. Because here's what happens in verse 6. Verses 1 through 5 is God saying, Joshua, private meeting time. Here's the marching orders. Here's what you're going to do. Verse 6 is this. So Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the Ark of the Covenant and let the 7 priests bear 7 trumps. And he basically simply turns around after God meets with him. He walks out of the room where God is, per se, and he walks out and he goes over to where the priests are and he says to them, hey guys, get up. Get the priests together, get the ram's horns, get the trumpets together, get these guys here, and go get all the people that are in charge of the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, the National Guard. Pull them together, we're going for a walk. What? This is what we're doing. I love how Joshua responds instantly. The amount of courage this man has is tremendous. He doesn't sit back and say, let me think about that. It says several times in the book of Joshua, you'll see the same thing. God says, do this. And the next verse is, and Joshua did. Here's my courage. I'll walk around the wall, keep looking at it, keep praying. God, you sure you know what you're doing here, right? God, you're going to take care of this wall, right? God, you've got this, right? Lord, I'll just keep walking, and I'll just keep being present, and I'll just keep being here because you have called me to influence this wall. So he gets all the people together, and he walks them through. Verse 12, you get up, Joshua rose early in the morning, does it every day, gets up early, says, let's go for a walk, it's time. Oh, I want to sleep in today. We're not sleeping in today. Get up, let's go, get in line, you know. And then verse 15, on the 7th day, they rose up early at the dawn of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. And it was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua says to the people, listen to what he says to them. As they're walking around and they get to the stopping point, they get around the 7th time, everybody stops, the feet stop marching, and here everybody has this quiet hush. And Joshua yells this, shout! For the Lord has given you the city. Do you hear it? This courageous and strong leader is looking at the same wall that they're looking at. He's standing there. Let's see if you can follow me. He's standing there. Shout! For the Lord has given you this city. Do you see how ridiculous this looks? Right? Flesh it out. The priests didn't even hesitate. The priests, they pull out the trumpets, they pull out the horns, and they blast in this silent moment where Joshua calls everyone out to this one thing. And they blast the trumpets. They blast these ram's horns. And everyone right behind it echoes and begins to shout at the wall. What's cool is archaeologists have discovered that the wall was there, and the wall did fall down. There's a lot of debate around that. And archaeologists that have, atheistic archaeologists that have no biblical history. I'm not saying Christians came and they have this kind of weird thing where Christians say, well, it did happen, and we sent our archaeologists. That's not, I'm saying people that don't believe in the Bible say that this actually happened. Now, some will argue and say, well, there was an earthquake at that time. And by the way, they've even marked it with the dating apparatus stuff that they do to within 40 years of when Joshua would have been there, which is the best they could really do. And they've been able to come up with some pottery and stuff like that to identify that, wow, this seems like there's some validity to this. I'm going to look and say, well, I trust in the Lord God, my Savior, the one who wrote this out for me, and the history behind it, and I know a whole lot about the history behind this as well, that drives me to a point of understanding that they looked at that wall, they followed Joshua's lead, they shout at the wall, and the next thing they know, the wall comes down. It takes courage to walk together around a wall and then to think that you can influence it by talking to it. This year, God has been leading the leadership team and I to simply get us to walk together around the wall. For the last couple of years, we've gone through some crazy things in the world. And the effects that it's had on people spiritually, emotionally, and physically has been not what anyone really have anticipated. And so this year, as we set out at the beginning of the year, the leadership team and I prayerfully we say, God, what do you want? We started out with saying we need some healthy habits. We need to start with some foundational things. Like a physical therapist goes into someone that's been in a car accident and things aren't going so well physically, and they need to help you to figure out how to walk again or how to use your fingers again and things like that. I've stopped and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the entire year, and I'm going to go through this series of working through some healthy habits so that we can figure out just simply, here's what it is to walk together around the wall. That's it. Where we're walking together. We're allowing God to lead us. We're working on the inside of us, on our faith in God, to say, okay, God, you have something for us. You're going to work in us. You've got a plan that's going to be shown to us as we go. We don't know what it looks like to be the salt and the light in with one, or with our family, with our community, or with our nation or the world. But Lord, we're willing. And so we've been doing that. And each month we've been talking about a healthy habit that takes us to go from being crushed to crushing it. Influencing others, it requires courage to walk up to what we see as a wall and believe that God is then big enough to take the wall down. And we're doing it. I love to see what God's up to. Church, I just kind of want to maybe pull back the curtain a little bit and say, I'm so excited for what God's been doing the last 6 months here. I see how we're walking together. How we're jumping in on some different things and saying, hey, let's do this. Currently, it's around 65 to 70% of you are involved in something here at the church. That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm thrilled to pieces that you're willing to say, I'll help. It doesn't matter if it's, hey, I'll help to clean this. I'll help to pull the weeds over here. I'm going to help to greet. I'm going to help to sing. I'm going to help to... It doesn't matter. It's that you're all saying, let's walk together around the wall. You're here. Jillian has been working on some things, and I've asked her to come and share the summary of our summer projects and give some details about that. So she's going to do that, because what that is simply walking around the wall together. So Jillian, why don't you come and share?